Hello and welcome to the Great Big Indian Wellness Show. My name's Tony Patty, wishing you a very warm welcome. Right here on the Great Big Indian Wellness Show today, we're going to be talking about mental health. Now, we understand what mental health is and how best to navigate and support children and teenagers, and the ways in which to recognize if there may be any issues and what strategies could be adopted to simply treat mental health. And there's many different strategies that we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about what do we mean by mental health, how do we recognize the signs, how can we support children, and also how can we ensure that we can prevent mental health in the first place, and also families, what can they do to ensure good mental health as well, and maintenance for all, as it were. And joining us today right here on the panel is Priya Amlani, is an anxiety specialist from Amlani Coaching. And Priya is passionate about coaching and has a genuine desire to assist others in leading a life of success, excellence, and more importantly, mental well-being, which is what we're talking about today. So she aims to support every individual overcome anxiety and show them that there is a life full of possibilities. Priya has an empathetic, gentle approach and has worked with numerous adults and children across all different walks of life. And her role is not only to help you look at what's causing the problems in the first place, but also to provide you with practical ways of dealing with them as well. So she's got a stellar background, a fantastic history in what she's done with as an NLP coach as well. And we welcome Priya to the program today. Priya Amlani, a very warm welcome to you, and thank you for joining us today right here on the Great Big Indian Wellness Show.
Thank you for having me, Tony. It's lovely to be here.
Thank you very much indeed. You're very welcome. So we've been talking about lots of things here on the Great Big Indian Wellness Show, but mental health is something that people don't really talk about, do they, Priya? And I'm sure with your experience and the many years that you've had of treating people with mental health, it's quite a taboo subject, isn't it? People don't really want to talk about it.
Yeah, you're right. It is one that people avoid talking about, and is thought about as a problem. But mental health is not a problem, just like physical health is not a problem. Mental health is not a problem. We all have it. So yeah, and it's quite high in our community, unfortunately. You know, it's our community that we really avoid talking about. So yeah.
I mean, what draws me on to perhaps asking you, and this is probably a question for later on in our discussion on the program today, it's probably about with mental health, there's a lot of depression, there's anxiety, and along with that, there's things like Alzheimer's disease, and where there's the brain is decomposing as we get older and we start forgetting things. And sometimes acknowledging that, learning that, knowing about it, and how to deal with it is one of the most difficult things of all, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, no, you're right. As you know, I specialize in anxiety in particularly,
Yes.
but there's such a spectrum of issues, you know. We don't think about it. So there's, like you mentioned, forgetting in the older age, and that creates a lot of anxiety in
Mm.
people. We also have things like schizophrenia. We don't talk about bipolar. There's so much, but we have a huge spectrum of issues. And the main thing is to look after ourselves like we do our physical health. So, yeah.
That's very useful to know, and I'm sure we'll go deeper into the discussion in the program today. But if I was to say to you, and what would be your take on this, please, Priya, that everyone has mental health. What does one mean by everyone has mental health? What does that exactly stand for?
So, just like I said a moment ago, we're all born with mental health, just like we have physical health. And mental health is on a spectrum. So you can have good days and bad days, just like you have physical health. Some days you feel great, some days you don't.
Hmm.
And like we look after our physical health, we have to look after our mental health. But unfortunately, a lot of people think when we talk about mental health, it means that there's a taboo, there's a problem, there's a disorder, there's a disability. And the word I like to use instead of mental health is mental well-being. That takes the conversation and makes it a bit lighter, because I think in our community, particularly, if you start talking about mental health, people think, oh my God, they have a problem.
Yeah.
No. And if I may read you the definition of the World Health Organization, because I think it really summarizes it well. So
Yes,
it
would
says
love to
mental
hear it.
health is,
Yeah,
yeah.
would
So
love to hear it.
mental health is more than just the absence of mental disorders and disabilities. Mental health is a state of well-being in which an individual realizes his or her own abilities, can cope with normal stresses of life, can work productively, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. And I think we all strive for that, but we don't realize that that's what we're looking after. But as soon as the topic comes up on mental health, like, oh, we don't talk about this in public, or let's not talk about that now. But if you're at a dinner table and somebody starts talking about diabetes, then everybody's a doctor. You know what it's
Yes,
like.
exactly. Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So that's really powerful, because I love the last bit of what you were just reading there about mental health and changing into mental well-being, which is, I think, a great metaphor to use. So would it be fair to say then, Priya, that everyone in one shape or form or another has a mental health problem?
Yeah, we all have good and bad days. Just before I got onto the show, I had butterflies, right? That's anxiety. It's a protective mechanism, right?
Me too.
So we all feel those ups and downs, but
Mm.
how we handle them shows our mental strength and well-being. So yes, we all do. We all do.
We're wishing you a very warm welcome. Thank you for joining us here today on the Great Big Indian Wellness Show. And joining me today is Priya Amlani, who is an anxiety specialist. And we today are talking about mental health. And everyone, as Priya says, suffers from some form of mental health anxiety in one shape or form or another. And right here on the Great Big Indian Wellness Show, we're going to uncover some of those myths and mysteries that surround mental health that we hear about so much every day, but don't necessarily talk about it. So, Priya, recognizing the signs of anxiety, which is something that you specialize in, where mental health is concerned, let's bring children into the equation and teenagers, because they are now leading very different lives to what you and I did as children and as teenagers. There's the social media pressure, peer pressure, friends, school, college, everything that goes around in this very fast moving society that we live in. And it's all about keeping up with the Joneses, in my opinion. What is your take on that?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. We had a very simple lifestyle. My background is from a small village in Kenya, Kitale, so it was very
Mm.
different. And then when I did move to the city, to a boarding school, I actually did have anxiety. We didn't recognize it. But I like to explain and clarify what anxiety is. Anxiety is a perceived threat, right? So it's when we think something will happen, right? And then what happens is your body, if you overthink it, your body then starts to kick in. You know, our mind body relationship is connected. So anxiety presents itself in two ways for children and teenagers: is being overly concerned or avoiding situations. You start avoiding situations, and we can talk about that a bit later. But I agree with you. We make anxiety a much bigger problem than it needs to be.
Mm.
But you are right. The younger generation of these days are impacted more because of the lifestyle, because of what's going on. You know, social media plays a huge part. And before, if you were bullied at school, I was when I was little, it stopped at school. You came home, it was a safe space. But now it carries on because we have virtual bullying going on. You know, you're never left alone. You have your school WhatsApp group, and you have your Instagram, or you have your social media, or your Snapchat. So it carries on, and that's where the problem then escalates, I think.
That's very interesting, because when you mention bullying and peer pressure and things like that, we often go through it through our younger days, but the anxiety continues in later years of life. And I'm sure that's another discussion for another day. But if I was to ask you about some of the common causes of anxiety, which I think is very relevant to what you've just told us as well, perhaps it's stress, because we do lead very fast lifestyles in this day and age, resulting from work, school, personal relationships, emotional traumas. What about financial concerns, stress caused by a chronic or even a serious medical condition, a major event, or performance, if you like, and the side effects of certain medications? I mean, the list could go on, but the thing is, you know where I'm coming from, and you get the gist of what I'm saying here, Priya. So anxiety is brought on by many different factors, And of some of the factors that I've actually spoken to you about here today and shared with you on the program, what would you say would be the primary concern for you?
I think we need to put that into context. I think we need to start understanding that anything can trigger anxiety
Yeah.
for any individual, and it's different for each individual. So, the key basic understanding we need to have is when you think something is going to happen, it's a perceived threat. Anything. So, like you mentioned, side effects of medication. So, some people then start getting anxious by if I take this tablet, oh my God, I've taken it, I have a tummy ache, if that's a side effect. So, it's a perceived threat and it's what your mind is doing to your body. So, I agree, there's so many triggers, but I think if you look at how they're diagnosed, as a coach, I don't diagnose, but how they are diagnosed, there's certain criteria they have, So a lot of what you mentioned would fall under generalized anxiety disorder. But then there's more specifics that go into it. You have people who have social anxiety. So these are people who struggle with public places or they struggle with socializing. So the way it affects children is it would affect them going into school, right? So everything you said, absolutely. They also, most people will have some form of anxiety, but it's how it takes over their life. That's what we have to avoid.
That's very interesting. So, when it comes to supporting people who are suffering from anxiety, and in particular children and teenagers, which we mentioned a few moments ago, right here on the Great Big Indian Wellness Show, how do we go about supporting people who are struggling with anxiety and going through the traumas and the changes that you spoke about with us today?
So, as you know, I work predominantly with children, teenagers, and families, and I work alongside with parents. And I think the key thing is to normalize anxiety. I think we need to talk about it as a protective bodily function so that when a child is going through it, they're not thinking, oh my God, there's something wrong with me. I need to hide it from my parents. They'll worry about me. They'll not be happy about it. So if we start with just talking about it as a family and normalizing it, so when your child comes and says, Mom, I feel a bit, most children won't come and say, I feel anxious. Teenagers will, but the younger ones will say, oh, Mom, I don't want to go. I have a tummy ache. What if people laugh at me? So let's start to recognize it first. So as a parent, the way to recognize it is if your child suddenly starts to avoid situations, they start to have tummy aches on Sunday night before school or before football match, or if they is a particular day they start avoiding going into school, or if there's a after school club, they start to avoid doing things. So avoidance is the first thing to look out for. And the second thing to look out for is being overly concerned. So, oh, what if people laugh at me? These are all perceived ideas. It's not about confidence. What if I don't play well is very different. That's confidence. Anxiety is like, what if I trip? What if we don't get there in time? What if people laugh at me? Oh my God, Mom, I can't do it. I'm feeling really angry. And then for some people, you start to recognize in tears, behavioral issues. So the behavior starts to change. They get angry, they get snappy. We have to recognize this first. Once you recognize it, the first thing I say to my parents, don't always assume that any behavioral issue is them behaving badly and them being awkward. There might be something driving it, and often it is anxiety, the fear of doing something. A lot of parents say, but my child never wants to do their homework. Procrastination is also a sign of anxiety because that's an avoidance of doing something. So those people who struggle with reading and writing. So once we understand that, what we need to do to support our children is create small steps, right? Have small steps for them to be able to succeed. And I think the key here is, so for example, when I was talking about a child who is anxious about going to school, what will happen if people laugh at me, X, Y, and Z? It's about helping them learn how to self-regulate. Don't regulate for your child constantly. You'll be okay, because we think they want to hear that, but they need a space to calm down. So just sit with them. Say it's okay to feel like that. Once they calm down, then you can say, do you think that would happen? And if it does, what can you do? So teaching them self-regulation is a key skill here. And the second thing that really helps with anxiety is building the self-esteem at home, right? And I think I really need to clarify what self-esteem here is. Self-esteem is when you can accept that we all have good and bad within us. So being able to be okay with, okay, I'm good at maths, but I'm not good at English. Or, you know what, I'm sporty, but I'm not academic. And that's okay. So when you have good self-esteem and good self-regulation, the anxiety starts to come down.
That's so interesting because what you've just told us in this really useful piece that we've just shared with us now, Priya, it's all about a state of mind and something which is so hidden, which we can't recognize or see, yet alone talk about sometimes, especially from a child's perspective. Very interesting. This is the Great Big Indian Wellness Show, and we are joined today by Priya Amlani. And Priya Amlani is an anxiety specialist. And today we're talking about mental health, and everyone has mental health, as Priya explained a few moments ago to us today, right here on the program. Priya, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about prevention, but I'd like to combine that, if I may, about when we go about talking about preventing mental health issues from arising, I'd like to sort of like combine that with treatment, if you like, and perhaps even self-treatment. Could be exercising, not getting enough sleep is a major factor, eating well, relaxation. And you talked about anxiety earlier on, where people are so complex and so busy, particularly children, they don't get time, or parents not taking time out with them to say, hey, it's okay, you know, we're here for you. We can do this in stages and do it in steps. And of course, there's another one, that smoking and consumption of drinks as well, caffeinated drinks. What is your opinion on that? Because I'd like to talk about prevention and treatment at the same time, combined, if you'd like.
Okay, so let's talk about prevention and then I'll get into
Okay.
treatment. I'm not sure I would use the word treatment, but we'll talk about that.
Okay.
So what I mean by prevention, let's talk about it. So things to do is to recognize, normalize it, making sure we have time, like you said, to relax, right? So as a family, when you one of the key strategies I use with my families and the clients I work with is called dinner diary. And what I mean by dinner diary is we go around the table and we would talk about one thing that you liked or was good that day and one thing that was bad that day. And what that does is it normalizes for the children that even parents have bad days. And I think sharing your vulnerability as a parent is a strength, and that prevents mental health, because a lot of the children we see is they have this persona that our parents are perfect, they don't react, we react behind closed doors, we try and protect our children, you know, we don't want them to see us getting angry or mad, or if you've had a bad day at work, you play it down sometimes. But I think
Yes.
sharing these vulnerabilities is the key issue in avoiding anxiety, because then your children are not living up to this perceived, you know, glass ceiling or whatever it is. You know, we're normalizing, we have bad days too, it's okay. And so dinner diary is something I recommend that you do on a table, and you don't have to start analyzing or talking about it, but just children listening. Oh, mom had a bad day today. Oh, dad had that. That's okay. So what I'm feeling is okay, and we still had a good day as well. We had something good, something bad. Prevention, that's one thing, so talking about it. The second thing, as you mentioned, was relaxation. And when we talk about relaxation, is we've become a society of doers. We have to be doing. We think when we're relaxing is being scrolling on our phone. That's not relaxing. You know, relaxing is really being mindful, being present in the moment. And relaxing doesn't mean you have to do an artwork, or you have to be doing gardening, or you have to be playing. It's okay to do nothing and get bored. And I think that's another thing. If we let our children get bored, then they find that resilience within and find what they're capable of, right? Because we always schedule. Yeah. And one of the biggest issues is stop overscheduling our children, you know, because the Joneses, like you said in the beginning, because they're doing X, Y, and Z sports, we don't have to do that, right? So I think that's the prevention. Let's look at some of the treatment. So when I talk about treatment, I'm a coach. My approach is holistic, right? The way they do it on NHS might be quite different. But the main thing is about understanding that our thinking, feeling, and body are related. And the main key fundamental approach I take, and that's why I don't call it a treatment, the approach I take is we're all born with innate well-being. So it's all inside of it. We all have our well-being. It's not broken, it's not lost, or it's not damaged. It's just hidden away. Right? And when we start to show children that, when we start to see families that, suddenly they're not looking for a solution outside of them. They're starting to listen to the inside. It's always there. We know when we have to rest. We know when we have to stop, you know. So I think when we start understanding that it's within us, mental well-being is always there. Resilience is in us, right? And it gets covered up with our misguided thinking. Yeah. Most anxiety comes from our thought processes. So it's the misguided thinking that hides it. So the way we approach it is we look at this misguided thinking. Why are you thinking a particular way? Was it your trauma? Was it your experience? So what can we take from that previous experience? So like if we think about football, that we just lost Euro 2020 a few days ago, I think it's very important. There's a lot of press going on. Is it fair to let the young teenager take the last penalty? Yeah. Well, no, it's okay. He will become resilient. He will learn. If he takes his learning from that, he's going to be okay. Right? So we all have the strength. We just have to take the learning from every individual circumstance. That's really how powerful. I work at treating it.
No, that's very powerful, and I love the scenario you've just given us, because the press would hound these people to death because, oh, they missed the penalty when we just recently went through the Euro Cup final. But another story for another day. And what's really interesting is that you explained so well what families can do together to ensure good mental health, and sometimes it's the unspoken word. You've got the inner voice, but the inner voice is not necessarily talking to your mind, and the mind's not talking to your soul. And there is a disconnect there, which I fully understand and appreciate what you're talking about. Priya Amlani, you are an anxiety specialist from Amlani Coaching. And to sum up now, could you give us 3 things that we could take away from today's conversation right here on the Great Big Indian Wellness Show? 3 things that people can do to recognize mental health and anxiety.
I think the first thing is let's make it okay to talk about it, and it's okay. You know the cliche, it's okay not to be okay. So if we're having bad days, let's normalize that. Let's not pretend as families that we're not okay. Let's talk about it, right? That's the first thing. The second thing is, you know, learn to stop, learn to pause. Do things for fun, not always for competition or always for being the best. And learn to be okay with failures and mistakes. I think that's very key. Once you start being okay with mistakes, then your motivation is from a different place. It's not from a place of fear, but it's from a place of wanting to do better. And that is key, right? And what would be the third giveaway? If you're really concerned that it's something you can't manage as a family, then you must reach out and get help through your GP, or reach out to people like myself. There's plenty of coaches. There's a lot of help on the NHS. So if you're not sure, reach out, get help.
Yes, that's very useful indeed. Priya Amlani, thank you very much for talking to us today right here on the Great Big Indian Wellness Show. I wish I could talk to you for longer. It's such a deep subject and big subject to talk about, and I'm sure there'll be future opportunities in which we can do that with you right here.
I look forward to it.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony.